So this week I'm joined by Ryan Noon. He's the co-founder and chairman of Material Security, the cybersecurity company making cloud-based email a safe place for sensitive data. He previously started Parastructure, which was acquired by Dropbox, where he was an engineering manager prior to starting Material Security. Ryan, welcome to No Priors.
Hey, it's great. It's great to be here, man. Always lovely to talk to you.
Oh, yeah, it's always fun to chat with you. So one of the reasons I was excited to be chatting with you today is I feel like you have such a great perspective on both the broader security industry, various tech topics, et cetera, but also specifically how this all starts to tie into AI. And I know that at Material, you were a very fast adopter, actually, of AI-related technologies as the first sort of APIs really came out, and you started playing around with them quite early and doing interesting things with them. Do you want to first talk a little bit about how you started Material, and then maybe we can touch on how you started getting involved with the AI side of it?
Yeah, sure. So we started Material, I guess, 2016, 2017 or so. I had left Dropbox and, was living in Europe and fell in love with all of the election hacking that happened year. That year it was pretty nasty. Like every random Gmail account kept getting like dumped on the internet. So I had an idea for how to protect a Gmail account, just an ordinary personal one in like a fairly novel way. I coded it. It shockingly worked. The Gmail API let you do it. I brought it back home and showed it to some friends. And we realized this is actually a special case of a broader way of thinking. Now, 7 years later, it's a, whatever cybersecurity unicorn thing. And we get to work with the coolest companies, in the world by far. And the stuff that you get to do at the scale is just mind blowing. It's, it's wild to think just where it started and where it's come.
And what are the main products that Material focuses on, just for the audience so they have a better sense?
Yeah. So the broad thesis is basically we've all kind of got these Google and Microsoft accounts. Email is sort of where we started, but since then we've kind of just went deeper and deeper and deeper into sort of everything that you can use a Gmail account or a Microsoft account for. The bread and butter of the business is selling to companies mid-size and up with these big Google Workspace and Office 365 deployments. The product has a bunch of different modules that are all kind of based around the main things people worry about. The first big product that you mentioned, in the intro was people have years and years of sensitive information sitting in these accounts. If somebody, gets into your Google account, they're just going to download all of your email and go through it later, and your whole life is in there. It's even worse, in a corporate environment. And so that product, what it can do actually is finds, sensitive stuff that's just sitting around, kind of just sitting in your inbox, in your archive, whatever, and then it can basically redact it and then replace it with a clean copy so that if somebody gets in and downloads the whole thing, they don't get anything good. But then if you happen to need it, like I like having all this information at my fingertips, you can just press a button and do an extra Face ID or a Touch ID or, more advanced policies in work, but just something that's easy for you but hard for the attacker. So we started there, and then we expanded into anti-phishing. People can send you tricky emails and get you to do things and steal money from you. We expanded into account takeover protection, which is, more of the things that people do after they compromise the account. And, I try to reset all your other accounts and steal your bank account and all of that. Just the operative concept is defense in depth, which is just, just assume that the bad guy got in, what do they want? They got over the wall, there should be another wall and a machine gun. It's like history has all these fairly basic lessons about resiliency that never really always get applied the right way when it comes to computers. So
it's kind of like, I guess the part of the impetus was the 2016 election where, there was all the things around the Podesta emails and Hillary Clinton and everything else. And the basic idea is, somebody's able to hack your account, but it doesn't matter because your email's not accessible to them or the sensitive information that you designate.
Yeah, I mean, it matters, but we used to call the company like seatbelts for email or whatever back in the day. It's like, it sucks to crash your car. It really sucks to go through the windshield. Google and Microsoft, have a total duopoly on all of this. And kind of whatever little thing that they missed from a security perspective is, world altering. You got there's a headline every couple months, like, every cabinet secretary just got their email hacked because all of the eggs were in Microsoft's basket, and so we kind of just exist to fill the gaps in whatever doors they leave open. That's, it's very fragile having a duopoly. Duopolies are stable in the market, but very fragile when it comes to security.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You were one of the fastest adopters, I feel, in terms of hands-on use of LLMs for security applications. How did you start thinking about the use cases where generative AI would be useful?
The second you give a coder a REPL, we will start iterating basically, right? And ChatGPT, if nothing, was not the world's greatest REPL. So I mean, we just started playing with it, and then we're like, there's a lot of security domain knowledge like baked into this thing. It turns out if you feed, precisely one internet to precisely a million GPUs, it picks up a thing or two about cybersecurity. And so, it's the kind of thing that obviously like the bad guys are starting to figure out in earnest. And it's not like you can prevent this stuff from getting democratized, but we just you could do simple things like you could feed it like a bunch of raw email headers. Anyone who's coded with these things, it's like this weird wetware grafted into the middle of a computer. It's like it's squishy and stochastic and parity, but you have to integration test and model around it. I think the analogy I used at the time is like Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat. Like it has eaten the souls, of thousands of security engineers. And so like you might as well use it because honestly, like there's a lot of just raw operational work that happens in security of just like, we need to rarefy this signal, filter out the noise, and then honestly feed it through a human being who has some experience as to what the bad guys are trying to do. And it turns out LLMs are fantastic at that. And so that was the first use case that we really kind of productionized. But beyond that, it's kind of gone crazy. So there's a lot of engineering you have to do that.
It's kind of amazing because if you look at modern LLMs, they have this mixture, to your point, of sort of this deep knowledge base, which is the internet, and to your point, sort of the souls of security engineers on the internet. And then, it has this sort of chain of thought or sort of reasoning that is very useful to use in certain circumstances. Is there any data that you feel is really missing or a specialized corpus you need to provide or anything else that really helps from a security perspective that you need to augment or fine tune or do something with?
Honestly, like, I've seen a lot of, startups starting from scratch here and whatever. And, as an engineer, like I know when I have headroom and honestly, even in like GPT 3.5, there was plenty to work with. I'm seeing a lot of shovel selling, obviously right now in the AI market. And I'm seeing a lot of like, I need to pretend that I have a moat. So I need to, fine tune all this stuff and whatever. But yeah, no, I mean, so many things that were very, very, very hard for computers, 18 months ago are very, very easy for off the shelf models. So like, I think, maybe chew your food first, security industry.
Yeah. What do you think are the best application areas then for generative AI and security? Is it pen testing? Is it phishing? Is it something new? Is it some form of like supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the offensive side is what you're not supposed to talk about too much. But obviously the bad guys are talking about it. And in security, it does have this arms racy sort of aspect to it. So like, we need security LLM companies because the bad guys exist. Honestly, like the order zero thing, when I keep meeting with founders, because you hear this, there's all these like kind of classic cliches in the cybersecurity industry, like the cybersecurity skills shortage, like America needs, to bring back the draft and make everyone get a security certificate or something. Okay, like, that you have like 90% of a human that you can use for like a penny and a half, right? Okay, start there, And so like, there's just basic things like that, but it gets more interesting, I think, from there. But like, let's go to Disney World collectively after we do that, and then we'll come back.
Do you see any CISOs actively using LLM tools today? Or is it still kind of early and it's like there's an adoption curve, or is it going to just be in the hands of the vendors?
Well, I think the best thing about the security industry is that there's also the security cottage industry of like, it's not the fancy security vendor who's, buying the CISO steak and having them drive Ferraris around Vegas every August. It's like just a strong like security engineer who's just hacking something together. And so some of the best companies that I've seen, are just that. And so you're seeing all these like there are cool projects out there. I don't want to name drop too many of my friends on this podcast, but like just like the stuff that Socket's doing of just like analyzing NPM dependencies, like even just like stack analysis, like looking for like, hey, you dropped sensitive information in the middle of your code base. Like that's like such a messy, hard problem as any like computer science person can tell you. And like, these things are pretty good at reading code, So like all sorts of just basic stuff like that is starting to pull through. So.
What do you think is the biggest risk or cyber threat from this technology?
Oh, I mean, like it can be a human, and I'm just talking about the text models, right? Like so much of cybersecurity is just text, and there's nasty hacks, that are reported, where someone's voice was faked very convincingly, and they made a phone call, and blah blah blah. Like humans, trust humans through computers. That was, I think, the key mistake we made.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of APIs now that do voice cloning, like LMNT or 11 or some of these other folks, right? And so basically, I guess the threat is that somebody voice clones and then they can use it to call you and pretend that they're your bank and ask for permission to do a wire or spoof you on the other side where...
It doesn't even have to be that hard. Like as in the standard, like, new employee joins company, receives text message claiming to be CEO thing. Like it works at scale, like, so like, and it's, the sheer amount of like, you go see these attacks that random bad guys are sending to people, and like they're not even like using grammar properly. Like if all they could do was like spell check the bad guys, and that's all you were using like whatever off the shelf open source LLM for, like even that would make a difference materially on cybersecurity policy returns.
How bad do you think this gets on what time frame? So say we're at it's 3 years from now and we're at GPT-6 or something. Do you have any predictions in terms of the sort of effective threat level or the capabilities or what might happen then?
Yeah, I think we all kind of like wonder about this. I was talking to somebody from the White House who was like trying to figure out how to talk about security and LLMs a little bit. Like, I think the operative analogy that ended up helping was like Bronze Age versus Iron Age kind of thing, and that like if you're a tribe or something and you have bronze weapons and your neighbor next door gets iron weapons, then like you're going to have a bad time. Like you're going to need to go and get iron weapons. And so all of this talk about like, we need to, airstrike the data centers and prevent it from being aligned or not aligned or whatever the current term is. Like that's like saying, well, this super high grade carbon steel from space, needs to be restricted. But honestly, like if someone's got iron weapons against your bronze armor, like good night, And so these LLM things, it's a step function. Like, forever often, we used to whine that we only had, 140 characters and not like flying cars. Like technology does give you step functions every once in a while. And like, this is just that, so it doesn't mean that like, we're all doomed now. And I think getting a sense of the scope of the threat is really hard in cybersecurity, because you could be like, hey, we're a Fortune 500 and we left the front door open for a year and no one walked in it. Like hackers are fake. Cybersecurity industry is BS, right? Or you can be some like little no-name company and just get run over and you're like the barbarians are at the gate. And it's like really hard to know exactly what you're up against, right? But what's interesting is that like automation, like it's like you can be more human. And you can like one human can now supervise 1,000 humans. You don't need a room full of like jerks trying to hack grandma or whatever. When honestly, like one jerk will now suffice. With a for loop.
Yeah. To that point, it feels like there's a few different types of actors in the cybersecurity world, right? To your point, there's sort of individual players. Sometimes that's ransomware or sort of financially driven folks, and then there's state-based actors, right? And it seems like some of the attacks we had a year or two ago on parts of our more physical infrastructure and supply chain may have been through state-based actors. How do you think about that in the context of these things? Is it, we must continue to invest in LLMs at scale as a broader national security side of things? Does it modulate your thinking at all?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like you have to invest in cybersecurity. Like my moral basis for cybersecurity existing is that it is essentially like the waste heat of all other innovation in computing and information, which is like, if a computer is doing something new for you that it wasn't doing last year, then like the utility of that will drive adoption. And then like cleaning up after it for like whatever the side effects of that are, is what, essentially cybersecurity, does, right? And so we are the cleanup crew for all other innovation, which is, it's a living, it's an honest living. So whenever innovation happens, like the entire world will adopt it before they realize, like, oops, it messes up democracy, or like, oops, whatever, like utility drives adoption, not safety. Like, welcome to Earth, And so, I think like on the nation state side, like it's, you don't have to even be hyperbolic with like, it's the atom, it's the whatever. It's because like, fundamentally, like intelligence is now a commodity that we can arms race, like weird, it's not, like atomic power can arms race. Like, no, like intelligence itself can now go Red Queen.
Yeah, that was the original premise under OpenAI, right? The concern was that Google and a few other folks had, real advancements in AI, and they were driving most of it. And so OpenAI, I think, originally was meant to be kind of a counterbalance to that, so that there wasn't a single player that would effectively dominate all of AI, or if it was, it'd be under this sort of philanthropic guise, right? And so it's interesting that even in the early days of this stuff, a lot of the emphasis was on this: let's avoid some over aggregation of power within AI.
But if you have a lot of intelligence that is extremely online, like you have a ton of power. And, the West, I think, is especially vulnerable to this. Like open societies, I think, are extra vulnerable when it comes to InfoSec stuff, because like we put it all out there. We adopt these systems, we open them up, we let the private sector totally handle them. Like we are early adopters of every digital technology, and we are very happy to wave our soft underbelly on the internet as a society. We don't lock it down.
How does that differ from totalitarian states from a cybersecurity perspective?
Like you could literally, if you're like North Korea, you're going to say, you're all going to use this Linux distribution, but it doesn't support, whatever I want. I'm sorry, we're an authoritarian state. Like, well, what, like, what if I get phished? Sorry, like that's not how bank accounts work in our country. Like it's just like you can control information. You can't. This usually gets like viewed through the lens of like social media disinformation. If you can, regulate and lock down, the entire social media discourse, then like, what election is going to get hacked and where would it get hacked? But the same thing I think holds true for all of cybersecurity. The other interesting, like way of looking at this that's always kind of baffled me is that, if cyberspace is a space, right? Like in like US military terminology, it is a command. Just like, North Africa is a command, like cyberspace is a command, like William Gibson, would be proud, right? But like in this space, like you are kind of on your own as an American. Like, it's like if I was in, like the military protects Americans and guards our borders. What does that even mean, with like cyberspace? Yeah. Like, I hope you hired a CISO, like.
Is there anything specific you think the DoD should be doing relative to these sorts of threats right now? Or if you were magically in charge of it, like what would you change or what would you do differently?
I mean, they do a fantastic job in a lot of levels. Like it's like, obviously like we were all the Valley had to deal with like Snowden and everything, 10 years ago and whatever. And I don't need to take a side on that one, but the point is like, we have some pretty incredible people, doing offensive stuff as well in cybersecurity, and deterrence works pretty well a lot of the time as well, So when it comes to LLM specifically, I think everyone is still figuring out what the hell is even going on. Like it's going to take them a while. I think you see DARPA doing really interesting stuff, like there are interesting projects out there. But I think, and this is maybe a motif that I see broadly with LLMs, is like, unless you go super, super deep on this stuff, you kind of see everything through the lens of like the popular discourse of ChatGPT, like whatever, the New York Times or whatever has said about ChatGPT, or whatever experience you had the first time you used it 6 months ago when you were on the free version, is how you see everything. And so they'll be like, we need to make sure it doesn't make stuff up. We need to, have it generate blah, blah, blah. It's all kind of like order zero stuff. I think people have yet to realize that like the computer can think in like a much more salient way than like it ever could before. And so I think people are still playing catch up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it feels very underappreciated. Yeah, I feel like in general, people are viewing AI is this continuum where it's like it's a CNN, RNN, and now we have transformers, and it's just a straight line. And instead, obviously, it's a big discontinuity in terms of capabilities. And I think most people still don't think about it that way, or at least I should say many people, particularly outside of tech. And I actually think it's underhyped in all sorts of ways, which may be a different conversation.
Shovel selling is overhyped, but I think the thoughtful discourse on what our society will be like in 10 years is probably underhyped.
Yeah, good point. So one of the big debates that people have in this area is what degree of things will go to incumbents versus startups. And in security, the incumbents are really strong, right? They are very good at buying things and bundling and cross-selling and sort of the traditional enterprise playbook, which parts of tech have sort of forgotten for a while and maybe are coming back to now that we don't have ZERP anymore. How do you think about the things that incumbents will do versus startups? Like, is there any room for startups right now on the AI security side?
I mean, there's always room for startups. The cynical take here, or like the take I can give that is perhaps most informed and most cynical, whether this is whatever informed pessimism versus informed whatever, is that basically, in the cybersecurity industry there's some basic economics, right? There's, if you care about this, like there's a great paper that is actually required reading for everyone who's ever joined Material, which I've never enforced. But it's called The Market for Silver Bullets, right? Like Ian Grigg wrote it. I think I've sent it to you once. And it's like fundamentally, there's like markets for lemons and whatever, but there's markets for silver bullets, which is that like fundamentally there's the buyer, there's the seller, and there's the attacker, And so like the buyer cannot really be sure of the effectiveness of what they're buying and whatever. And so you can't really like look at a solution and be sure that it will save you, right? Like, you could buy an insurance policy, and there's a, like a truism that all cybersecurity products are just, complex insurance policies or whatever, right? But the point is like that mushiness exists. And so what has resulted in the free market here is these incredible distribution machines, right? You have, think like Cisco or Palo Alto Networks, or even, Microsoft and Google to an extent, right? Where they have the sales force, they have, the bundle, they have, the big conference with all the glitzy stuff or whatever, right? But they don't really know. Like if you ask the product manager at that company or whatever, like, and they're being honest, like they don't know what bad guys are going to be doing in 5 years any better than anybody else does, right? And they don't know what's going to be effective. So why would they plant seeds from scratch when they could just go harvest crops that are already growing and transplant them into their yard and water them with all these salespeople and all this bundling and all this market power, right? And so these like paved roads, I think they're just a function of the extra, like technological and product uncertainty that is just compensated for. That risk must be compensated for with extra low market risk, and so that's what you see, like Cisco just bought Splunk, but Splunk buys things. The whole market just works this way. I think I wrote a blog post once where I called it the cybersecurity industrial complex, and it's their PE firms, dressed up as innovators, blah, 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 blah. I was angry. I used to be very angry.
Yeah.
But fundamentally this happens. And so that means that we are kind of, entrepreneurs, at their worst. Like there can be new, great cybersecurity companies. There's still creative destruction that happens. Some of the best cybersecurity companies, didn't really exist 10 years ago. And that's like, you can still build big ones. Like VCs, don't stop, like VCs, when it comes to cyber stuff, will like, just go for base hits constantly, the worst ones, and a lot of the best VCs like never, make bets in cybersecurity because, at best you're going to get a $200 million takeout to Palo Alto Networks or whatever, right? That's the typical outcome. But, you can still build these big companies, and people should still try. But that farm system is still active. Like no one really knows, like the innovation will happen. And if the market's big enough and, you don't, as a founder, you don't want to stop the game on second base or whatever, and you want to keep going, those opportunities are there. And honestly, like discontinuities breed new companies, and there's entire classes of things that are unnecessary and obsolete now. So much of security is emitting logs and alerts and then parsing those logs alerts again and aggregating them. I spent a lot of time doing, data infrastructure and analytics in my life, after my cybersecurity grad degree, but before I started using that degree. And it's just like, serializing and deserializing data and parsing some old firewall thing from 20 years ago or whatever. And like an LLM can just eat that, like depending on volume and all that stuff. But there's just like a lot of spend, I think, is up for grabs as long as, people have their expectations in the right place.
I guess outside of material, like, is there any larger scale security vendors that you've publicly talked about rapidly adopting LLMs? I know Material's been very fast on it.
I mean, obviously, Microsoft had this, top-down mandate and had a year on everybody, and so they've been making a lot of noise and marketing it. But and that's theoretically cool, but I don't know how. I haven't used it personally yet. But you kind of, you probably saw this pattern, which is that like, kind of the growthy companies with the nerdy founders like immediately started integrating this into the product, right? And then the like youngish public companies that like totally still got it, would do like a thinner feature a little bit later. The big Fortune 500s are doing science projects, God bless them, and so I think I'm seeing that. And I've seen plenty of first bucket things that are very impressive. I've seen, like the look, you can type in the box, and if you have typos, the LLM doesn't care. I've seen that from the public companies that totally still got it, and then the science projects, are just really good for OpenAI's revenue, I assume.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And I guess there's also sort of the hybrid or overlap or partnership stuff. Like, for example, last year, I know Material did a partnership with Snowflake to support Office 365 and Google Workspace and provided sort of enhanced security benefits to joint users. And so there's also that sort of approach where you partner with the large incumbents to bring these new things to market in some sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, cybersecurity partnerships are super, super, super important because like people hate to have to buy like individual things in their cybersecurity stack, but they also hate when they buy a big bundle that sucks, So like the right answer for the customer is to like just for the vendors to be grown-ups and to work better together where possible.
Yeah, I guess more generally, it's been about 7 years since you co-founded Material. What do you think are the biggest changes or evolutions in security since then?
That's a good question. Honestly, like, I don't know how much has changed. Like, it's like, people still send emails, people still reply to text messages. I think, there's always like but Slack is going to have all those problems too, or whatever. And I think at the end of the day, like if something's a walled garden, like it will be involved in attacks. Someone will go in and like own you because they compromised Slack after they compromised this and escalated their whatever. But like entirely new attack surfaces of like, ways to get to users from across the internet, broadly speaking, like I think have somewhat stable. What's the sad thing? I spend a lot of time thinking about like mobile stuff, and it's sort of this like tragic thing where like locked these things down like hardcore now, right? It's actually like super limited what like vendors can do, and the average employee I think understands that their company probably owns their work email account or whatever, and has carte blanche to protect that and protect the company. But like, do you have your phone? Is it my phone? I brought it. I signed it in. Do I have MDM on it? All this stuff, and so that ends up being the situation where even Apple, who's like so good at locking it down to the extent that Zuck is super sad or whatever, like will lock down the device and prevent the most obvious forms of cybersecurity software being made, but but then we'll sit on the problem for years while like everyone gets run over. So it's people are usually. It's a sad thing in the tech industry that you probably see. People are better at keeping people out of their territory than using their territory. It's this very, very nasty, sad thing. So I think some of these problems I think have just gotten worse. I think there's always the infrastructure story of like the multi-decade mega trend of people getting rid of their data centers and allowing only a small handful of companies to buy all the semiconductors and then renting them from people. That centralization, it's not like the most interesting thing for a lot of us, but it's, you go to security conferences and it's, I had to buy these 7 things when I had a data center. Now I have to buy this one thing, but it comes with Amazon, but it sucks, but I have to buy this other thing. So that trend is not done. And there have been some great companies that have been built in that space in the last 7 years that, like you'd think that like AWS and Google and Microsoft could like keep this shit secure that they're renting you, but no, like, so I think that's been one of my biggest probably misses as an investor, not even independent of security. There's years of like, well, the AWS will bundle this one, and then no, they don't. Even like I did diligence on Snowflake's B and told whoever asked me to pass, because I'm like, Redshift exists, like AWS is not asleep at the wheel. And then AWS subsequently told me when I talked to them about this, they're like, we get paid either way. Like they don't own any CPUs. Like we can be lazy.
Yeah. They're the platform, so it works. Yeah. Are there other areas? I know that a lot of founders in both security, but also in enterprise, come to you for advice as they first get started in terms of starting their companies. Are there other areas of like enterprise that you're most excited or interested in right now?
Oh man, I have this love-hate thing just with security. Like if there's any founders listening to this, like security, like what's annoying is because it's very mushy, no one necessarily knows what products are effective and whatever, you can kind of just like really put your head down and like grind and sell and like build a beachhead with your company. And it might be a totally okay product. Like I was talking to a great founder yesterday, and they're like thinking about what to build and whatever. And it's like, take a step back and just like try and build an incredibly useful thing that everyone should buy. Stop thinking about the Gartner categories and, whatever, CASB, UBA, SIM, whatever, DNR, something. Like, stop like trying to like look at this like big, like, and you see these like some of the cybersecurity, iBankers and stuff will put out these big quadrants of everything and how it all fits in. The thing that consumer people make fun of us enterprise people for are extra make funnable in cybersecurity, and so I'm always just like, like go in there and like just like if it's a thing that connects to an API that everybody uses and saves them all a bunch of time and makes it way easier, like just build that. Okay, like stop worrying about your Gartner category. You got like 5 years to even like start paying Gartner, like stop it. Well, how many people I've like sent your blog post of like, what is a good market? Like market is not the same thing as marketing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that's a product that should exist. Everyone should just buy that. And like, then we have to x-ray it with like where distribution is going to come from. And like, like, is this going to be easy to sell on a reasonable time scale and whatever. I think my favorite companies I'm spending the most time with tend to be in security. But if you want a grouchy yet somehow still optimistic guy on your cap table, just, give me a call. But I'm looking to do less stuff in security.
Is there any other advice that you tend to give people starting companies for the first time?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, there's just the basics, like figure out your team. Like being a solo founder is actually totally okay. It's way better than being like, we had 3 coffees together and we just got married, So like just start with the team. Like everything is built on the team. Like it's the saddest thing in the world when you see like a beautiful company and then like it's just the foundation has a crack in it and you have to tear the whole thing down, Make sure you have the same like risk appetites and stuff like that. Like just those basic stuff. Like, especially when, we are irrationally exuberant again in Silicon Valley. We had a solid 6 months of being depressed because the end of free money.
I kind of wish it lasted a year longer or something. I think it would have been very, very healthy for everyone.
I know people like all the Warren Buffett quotes came back. I think Sequoia did like RIP good times like 7 or whatever, and now it's gone again,
Yeah, it's back to ZERP if you're an AI.
Just honestly, like just pick a good market, like look for a lot of dollars and a lot of other shitty people that like you can take those dollars from. The analogy that stuck for people was like the difficulty level of the game that is starting a company is essentially just like the size of the market, like the inverse of that. Like the bigger the market, like you can eat mistakes, you can burn time, it's just play the game on easy if you possibly can.
It's kind of interesting. That's kind of advice that I tend to give people who are working in AI right now, because I feel like there's so much low-hanging fruit. And you see these people doing these incredibly complicated things or incredibly hard things, and you're like, why are you doing something so hard when it's an early industry, right? In the latter part of an industry, when things have matured and sort of saturated, that's when you do the hard stuff. But in the early days of a new market, you just want to do the easy stuff because that's very tractable. It's faster. It's easier. Higher velocity.
Right.
So.
Like, I'm not the only one with this pet peeve, but you see, like, you need like really talented technologists on founding teams. Like, I really think it's like, we're in the technology industry. Like, if you leave the MBAs alone, they're going to do like Casper mattresses, but for mattress pads this time, but they come with razors on them and stuff. Like, they're going to follow the same templates. God bless them. They need to exist. But like, the best companies have a technologist, like, maybe not in the CEO role, but like someone there. And technologists, like, we love to do what we know. And so there's this like massive, like overabundance of engineering recruiting companies and, DevOps, but this time totally different, dev tooling, like infrastructure monitoring, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, dude, just like get out there and like learn a market that's not your own. Okay. Like, it's just, like the world needs your creative energy, to paraphrase one of our slogans from Dropbox back in the day. But like, you're going to have to like maybe leave your house, sort of, at least on Zoom, and talk to people and find a market, and I think with AI, you're seeing just the overabundance of shovel selling. Like, the world needs next generation Datadog for AI, but not that one because there's already that guy. This one's for testing, but not that kind of test, but mobile testing, that one. Yeah, right. And it's like, stop. Like, combinatorics will never let you down. There's always going to be a way to cross these things, But like, how big is that actual market? How big is it?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today on No Priors.
Yeah, it was great. A lot.
That was really fun.
Find us on Twitter at No Priors Pod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to see our faces. Follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. That way you get a new episode every week. And sign up for emails or find transcripts for every episode at no-priors.com.